The morning sun reflected off the sleek black Tesla as Sarah Chen Williams expertly navigated through Boston's busy streets. At 35, she had already achieved what many would consider the peak of success, a partner position at one of Boston's top venture capital firms. But today, like many other days, she was about to be reminded that success didn't shield her from certain realities. The clock on her dashboard showed 8:45 a.m. She was cutting it close for her 9 a.m. meeting with a promising tech startup. Their innovative AI platform had caught her attention, and she was leading the discussion for a potential $10 million investment. As she approached the intersection of Berkeley and Columbus, the traffic light turned yellow. Sarah made a split-second decision, calculating that stopping abruptly would be more dangerous than carefully proceeding through. She had barely cleared the intersection when the flash of red and blue lights appeared in her rearview mirror. Her heart sank, not from guilt, but from experience. She knew what usually came next. Following standard procedure, she pulled over to the right, into a quiet side street. Her manicured fingers reached for her wallet in her Hermes bag, gathering her license and registration before the officer approached. The mindset she had developed over years of similar situations clicked into place. Stay calm, be professional, no sudden movements. Officer Mike Peterson approached the Tesla, taking note of its pristine condition and the well-dressed woman behind the wheel. His face remained neutral as he reached the driver's window, which Sarah had already lowered. "License and registration, please," he said, his tone clipped and official. "Here you are, officer," Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady and professional as she handed over the documents. "I apologize if I did anything wrong. I'm running late for an important meeting, but I understand if you need to do your job." Officer Peterson examined her documents with what seemed like extra scrutiny. "Ms. Chen Williams, do you know why I pulled you over today?" "I assume it's about the yellow light at the last intersection," she responded calmly. "I made a judgment call based on safety, as braking suddenly seemed more dangerous." The officer's eyebrows raised slightly. "The light was red when you entered the intersection, ma'am, and according to our records, you have 2 previous warnings for similar violations in the past year." Sarah knew this wasn't accurate. She had received 1 warning 3 years ago for a rolling stop, nothing else. But she also knew from experience and countless conversations with other professionals of color that arguing rarely helped. "I see," she said carefully. "I was certain the light was yellow when I entered the intersection, but I respect your perspective. Those previous warnings you mentioned, could you tell me the dates? I only recall one incident from 3 years ago." Officer Peterson's face hardened slightly. "Ma'am, are you suggesting our records are incorrect?" "Not at all," Sarah replied, maintaining her composure. "I'm just trying to understand the situation fully. I take traffic safety very seriously, especially given my daily commute through the city." The officer returned to his patrol car with her documents. Through her rearview mirror, Sarah watched him typing on his computer. She used these minutes to send a quick email to her assistant about her delayed arrival, knowing the upcoming investment meeting would have to be pushed back. When Officer Peterson returned, he handed her a citation, not a warning, along with her documents. "You're being cited for running a red light and reckless driving. The total fine is $750, and you'll need to appear in traffic court. The date and time for your court appearance are listed on the citation. Drive safely, ma'am." Sarah accepted the citation without argument, but her trained eye quickly spotted multiple discrepancies in the report. The intersection location was wrong, and the time of the incident was listed 10 minutes earlier than actual. These details would matter in court. As the patrol car pulled away, Sarah sat for a moment, collecting her thoughts. She had learned long ago that success didn't make her immune to prejudice. If anything, it sometimes made certain people more determined to put her in her place. She reached for her phone to call her assistant again, this time to clear her schedule for the upcoming court date. The tech startup would have to wait. First, she had a more important point to prove. 2 weeks later, Sarah sat in the crowded traffic court, watching as case after case moved through Judge Richard Harrison's courtroom. She had arrived early, dressed in a simple but elegant navy blue suit, her laptop open as she quietly reviewed documents for an afternoon meeting. The courthouse, an old building with high ceilings and wooden benches, felt stuffy despite the air conditioning. Sarah observed how Judge Harrison handled each case before him. He was a man in his early 60s with gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses, who seemed to have already decided most cases before hearing them. Next case, Sarah Chen Williams, the court clerk called out. Sarah stood up confidently, straightening her jacket as she walked to the podium. She carried a folder containing photos of the intersection, traffic light timing records she had requested from the city, and her spotless driving record from the past 3 years. Judge Harrison didn't look up from his papers as she approached. Ms. Chen Williams, you're here for running a red light and reckless driving. How do you plead? Not guilty, Your Honor, Sarah replied clearly. I have evidence that shows. Ms. Chen Williams. Judge Harrison interrupted, finally glancing up with an irritated expression. The officer's report clearly states you ran a red light. Are you saying the officer is lying? Sarah maintained her composure, though she noticed how different his tone was compared to the cases before hers. No, Your Honor. I'm saying there's additional context that's important to consider. I have documentation showing. Documentation? Judge Harrison cut her off again, his voice carrying a hint of dismissal. The fact is, you'd have prior warnings for similar violations. This seems to be a pattern of behavior. Your Honor, if I may, Sarah started again, her voice steady. Those records are incorrect. I have my official driving record here, which shows only one warning from 3 years ago for a completely different situation. The judge leaned back in his chair, looking at Sarah over his glasses. Are you suggesting our court records are wrong, Ms. Chen Williams? A few other people waiting for their cases watched with interest. Sarah could feel their eyes on her, but she remained focused on the judge. I'm suggesting, Your Honor, that there might be a discrepancy that needs to be addressed. Additionally, the citation has incorrect information about the intersection location and time of the incident. Judge Harrison's frown deepened. Ms. Chen Williams, this court's time is valuable. Officer Peterson is a respected member of the force with 15 years of experience. His testimony carries significant weight. Sarah noticed how he emphasized the officer's experience while dismissing her evidence without even looking at it. She had seen this behavior before in countless meetings where her expertise was questioned simply because of how she looked. The fine is $750, plus mandatory traffic school, Judge Harrison declared, already reaching for the next case file. Pay the clerk on your way out. Your Honor. Sarah spoke up one last time. I request that my evidence be entered into the record before judgment is passed. The judge looked up sharply, clearly not used to being challenged. Ms. Chen Williams, I've made my decision. Unless you want to be held in contempt, I suggest you accept the ruling and leave. Sarah stood her ground, maintaining eye contact. For the record, I'm formally requesting an appeal and would like a copy of today's transcript. A slight murmur went through the courtroom. Most people simply paid their fines and left, especially after Judge Harrison showed his impatience. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, gave Sarah a subtle nod of respect. As Sarah turned to walk back to her seat, the courtroom doors opened. Marcus Thompson, her colleague and fellow partner at the venture capital firm, walked in. He was checking his watch, his designer suit and confident bearing drawing attention. Sarah, sorry to interrupt, he said, his voice carrying in the quiet courtroom, but we need to finalize the paperwork for the $50 million tech investment before the board meeting at 2. Did you review the term sheet I sent this morning? The courtroom fell silent. Judge Harrison's hand froze mid-signature on the fine document as he processed what he had just heard. $50 million. His eyes darted between Sarah and Marcus, his previous certainty visibly shaken. Marcus Thompson, unaware of the tension he had walked into, continued speaking as he approached Sarah. The Silicon Valley team is waiting for our call, and they're particularly interested in your analysis of their AI implementation. Should I tell them you'll be there in 15 minutes? Sarah kept her composure, though she noticed how every person in the courtroom was now paying attention. The same judge who wouldn't look at her moments ago was now staring openly. She turned to Marcus with a professional smile. I apologize, Marcus, but we'll need to reschedule. I'm in the middle of a court proceeding. She gestured to her folder of evidence. Judge Harrison was just about to review some documentation regarding my traffic citation. The clerk, who had been watching everything unfold, couldn't hide a small smile. She had seen thousands of cases in this courtroom, but never quite a moment like this. Marcus glanced at the judge, then back at Sarah, finally reading the room. Oh, I see. He straightened his tie, his Harvard Business School class ring catching the fluorescent light. Should I call Barbara and have her reschedule the board meeting? You know how particular they are about having both managing partners present for major investment decisions. Before Sarah could respond, Judge Harrison cleared his throat. Ms. Chen Williams, he said, his tone notably different from before. Perhaps we should review those documents you mentioned. He adjusted his glasses, trying to regain his judicial composure, in the interest of thoroughness. Sarah nodded politely. Thank you, Your Honor. As I was trying to explain earlier, I have several pieces of evidence that contradict the officer's report. She opened her folder, maintaining her professional demeanor despite the sudden shift in the judge's attitude. Meanwhile, Marcus had taken a seat in the gallery, his presence adding an unexpected weight to the proceedings. Other people waiting for their cases were whispering among themselves, some typing on their phones as they witnessed the scene unfold. First, Sarah continued. Here are the official traffic light timing records for the intersection in question. She handed the documents to the clerk, who passed them to the judge. You'll notice that the yellow light duration is actually longer than what's stated in the citation. Judge Harrison studied the papers with newfound interest, nodding as though he had intended to review them all along. Yes, very thorough, he mumbled, glancing occasionally at Marcus in his expensive suit. The courtroom doors opened again, and another colleague, Jessica Chen, entered with a tablet in hand. Sarah, sorry to interrupt, but the Singapore investors are online. They're asking about the sustainability metrics for the renewable energy portfolio you're managing. Sarah held up a hand politely to pause Jessica. Your Honor, would you like to review the rest of the evidence now? I have photographs showing the actual intersection, which differs from what's written in the citation, and my certified driving record. Judge Harrison shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The same documentation he had dismissed minutes ago now seemed critically important. The whispers in the courtroom grew louder as people realized they were watching more than just a traffic case. In light of this new evidence, Judge Harrison said, trying to sound judicial, I believe we need to take a closer look at this case. He glanced at his watch, then at the full courtroom. Perhaps we should set a separate hearing to review everything properly. Sarah stood firmly at the podium. Your Honor, with all due respect, you were ready to make a judgment just minutes ago. I believe it's only fair to complete this hearing now, while all the evidence is before you. She paused, her voice calm but firm. Unless something has changed that would affect your ability to make an immediate decision. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Everyone present understood exactly what had changed, and it had nothing to do with traffic laws. Judge Richard Harrison felt the weight of every eye in the courtroom on him. In his 25 years on the bench, he had never felt so exposed. The comfortable authority he usually wielded now felt like a spotlight revealing his prejudices. He looked down at Sarah's evidence again, actually reading it this time. The traffic light timing records were detailed and official. The photographs clearly showed the intersection, proving the citation had listed the wrong location. Her driving record was indeed clean except for a single minor warning from 3 years ago. Your Honor, Sarah spoke into the heavy silence. Would you like me to walk you through each piece of evidence now? The judge cleared his throat, buying time as his mind raced. Just minutes ago, he had dismissed this same evidence without a glance. Now, with the knowledge that the woman before him managed million-dollar investments, he was scrambling to appear fair and thorough. Marcus Thompson checked his phone, then looked up. Sarah, the board members are asking if we should postpone the vote on the clean energy project until you're done here. It's only a $100 million decision, but they value your input. Judge Harrison's face flushed red. Each casual mention of such large sums made his earlier behavior seem more prejudiced. He watched as Sarah calmly turned to her colleague. Tell them to start without me, Marcus. Right now, I'm focused on ensuring our justice system works fairly for everyone, not just those with certain titles or appearances. Her words hit Judge Harrison like a physical blow. In the gallery, several people nodded in agreement. Some were typing on their phones, and he realized with growing dread that this scene would likely end up on social media. Ms. Chen Williams, he began, trying to regain control of his courtroom. I apologize for my earlier hastiness. Let's review your evidence properly. He adjusted his glasses, noticing how his hands trembled slightly. Sarah began presenting her case methodically. As she spoke, Judge Harrison found himself noticing details he had ignored before. Her perfectly articulated arguments, her well-organized evidence, her professional demeanor, even when faced with unfair treatment. The court clerk, Mrs. Rodriguez, handed him another document. Your Honor, I found those previous warnings in the system that were mentioned earlier. She paused meaningfully. It appears they belong to a different Sarah Williams. The middle name and birth date are different. More whispers spread through the courtroom. Judge Harrison felt sweat forming on his forehead. Not only had he shown bias, but he had also based his harsh treatment on incorrect records that he hadn't bothered to verify. Furthermore, Sarah continued, her voice steady, I'd like to point out that Officer Peterson's report claims the incident occurred at 8:35 a.m., but the dashcam footage timestamp, which I've included in the evidence, shows 8:45 a.m. This 10-minute difference is crucial because the traffic light timing changes during peak hours. Jessica Chen, still standing near the door, spoke up again. Sarah, I hate to interrupt, but the Singapore investors are asking specifically about the environmental impact assessment you developed. Should I tell them you're currently dealing with what appears to be a case of judicial bias? Judge Harrison felt his chest tighten. In just 30 minutes, his reputation for fairness, built over decades, was crumbling. He looked at Sarah again, really seeing her for the first time, not as a stereotype, but as a highly accomplished professional who had been treated unfairly in his courtroom. Ms. Chen Williams, he said, his voice heavy with realization, I believe I owe you more than just a review of your evidence. I owe you an apology. He removed his glasses, meeting her eyes directly. My behavior earlier was inappropriate and unworthy of this court. Sarah stood quietly, letting his words hang in the air. The entire courtroom held its breath, waiting to see how this powerful moment would unfold. Sarah stood at the podium, considering Judge Harrison's apology. The courtroom remained silent, everyone waiting to see how she would respond to this unexpected turn of events. Her phone buzzed again with messages about million-dollar decisions waiting for her attention, but this moment felt more important. Thank you for your apology, Your Honor, Sarah said finally, her voice clear and measured. But I'm not interested in special treatment now that you know my profession. I'm interested in justice, not just for me, but for everyone who enters this courtroom. She opened her leather portfolio and pulled out another document. I took the liberty of reviewing public records of traffic citations in this courthouse over the past year. She handed the paper to the clerk. The data shows some concerning patterns in how fines and penalties are assigned across different demographics. Judge Harrison's face paled as he looked at the statistics. The numbers told a clear story of bias that couldn't be explained away by coincidence. Marcus, still sitting in the gallery, spoke up. Sarah, should I tell our PR team to prepare a statement? This kind of data might interest the Boston Globe. Sarah held up her hand. No, Marcus. This isn't about creating headlines or embarrassing anyone. It's about making real change. She turned back to Judge Harrison. Your Honor, I have a proposal. The judge leaned forward, his earlier arrogance replaced by genuine attention. I'm listening, Ms. Chen Williams. Instead of focusing on my case today, I'd like to work with the court to establish a review committee, Sarah explained. We need to examine how bias affects decision-making in our justice system and create practical solutions. Jessica, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. Sarah, your expertise in data analysis and organizational change could be valuable here, similar to how you transformed that struggling tech company last year. Several people in the courtroom were recording on their phones now, but Sarah remained focused on the bigger picture. She pulled out her business card and handed it to the clerk. Your Honor, I'm willing to volunteer my time and resources to help implement bias training and develop better systems for reviewing citations and complaints. She paused, making eye contact with the judge. My team has experience in using AI and data analytics to identify patterns of inequality in various industries. We could adapt those tools for the justice system. Judge Harrison removed his glasses, rubbing his eyes tiredly. Ms. Chen Williams, your approach to this situation is remarkably generous. Most people in your position would be calling for my resignation right now. Removing one judge doesn't fix the system, Your Honor, Sarah replied. But working together to acknowledge and address these issues might help create lasting change. The clerk, Mrs. Rodriguez, looked at Sarah with admiration. In 20 years working here, I'd never seen anyone turn a traffic citation into an opportunity for systemic reform. Sarah smiled slightly. In venture capital, we look for opportunities to turn problems into solutions. Why should this be any different? She gathered her evidence into her portfolio. As for my citation, I trust you'll review the evidence fairly now and make your decision based on facts, not assumptions. Whatever you decide, I hope this incident leads to positive changes in how justice is administered in this court. Marcus stood up, straightening his tie. Sarah, the board is asking if you're still joining the conference call. They're impressed you're handling both the $100 million investment and judicial reform on the same morning. Tell them I'll be there shortly, Sarah replied, then turned back to Judge Harrison. Your Honor, shall we schedule a meeting to discuss the review committee? My assistant can coordinate with your office. Judge Harrison nodded, a mix of shame and respect on his face. Yes, I think that would be appropriate. And Ms. Chen Williams? He paused, making sure he had her attention. Thank you for showing me a better way forward. Sarah nodded professionally, knowing that this moment could be the beginning of real change, not because of her status or wealth, but because she chose to transform an injustice into an opportunity for reform. The story of what happened in Judge Harrison's courtroom spread quickly through Boston's legal community. Within days, video clips of the incident had been shared thousands of times on social media, but not for the reasons many expected. Instead of public shaming, people were talking about Sarah's approach to addressing systemic bias. 1 week after the courtroom incident, Sarah sat in her office at the venture capital firm, reviewing emails from people who had similar experiences. Her assistant, Lisa, knocked on the door with another stack of letters. These came in this morning, Lisa said, placing them on Sarah's desk. And the Boston Bar Association called again. They want you to speak at their annual conference about bias in the justice system. Sarah picked up one of the letters, this one from a young black medical doctor who had faced similar assumptions in traffic court last month. As she read his story, her office phone lit up with another call. Sarah, it's Marcus. Her colleague's voice came through the speaker. Have you seen the morning news? 3 other judges from different districts have reached out. They want to implement your review committee idea in their courthouses. She turned to her computer, where a local news website was already open. The headline read, From Traffic Stop to Transformation, How One Woman's Experience Might Change Boston's Courts. That's good news, Sarah replied, still reading through the letters. But we need to make sure this leads to real change, not just good publicity. Just then, Jessica walked in with a tablet showing more social media responses. Sarah, you need to see this. Other professionals of color are sharing their courthouse experiences online. A surgeon, 2 college professors, and a bank executive have all come forward with similar stories. Sarah nodded, taking the tablet. The hashtag courtroom equality was trending, with people sharing not just complaints, but also suggestions for improvement. Many were following her example, offering their professional expertise to help create solutions. We've also received calls from 5 law firms, Lisa added, checking her notes. They want to provide pro bono support for the review committee, and the mayor's office left a message about forming a citywide task force. Sarah stood up and walked to her office window, looking out over the Boston skyline. She remembered how alone she had felt in that courtroom just a week ago. Now, her experience was becoming a catalyst for change. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Rodriguez, the court clerk. You'll be happy to know Judge Harrison just approved funding for mandatory bias training for all courthouse staff. He's taking this seriously. As Sarah read the message, Marcus appeared in her doorway again. The board is impressed with how you handled everything, he said. They think your approach to the courtroom situation shows exactly the kind of leadership we need. They're talking about increasing your investment portfolio to $2 billion. That's good, Sarah replied, still focused on the letters. But right now, I'm more interested in investing in justice. She picked up another letter, this one from a young law student who had been inspired by her story to focus on judicial reform. Jessica sat down across from Sarah's desk. The tech team finished analyzing the court data you requested. The patterns of bias are clear. They found significant disparities in fine amounts and conviction rates across different demographics. Send that report to Judge Harrison, Sarah instructed. He needs to see the full picture. And set up a meeting with those other judges who reached out. We should coordinate our efforts across districts. Lisa appeared again with more updates. The local law schools want you to speak to their students. And the state Supreme Court Justice called. She wants to discuss implementing similar reforms at the state level. Sarah looked at the growing pile of letters on her desk, each one representing someone who had faced similar prejudice. What happened in that courtroom was bigger than just her traffic ticket now. It had opened a door for real conversation about bias in the justice system. Schedule the meetings, she told Lisa, and find out if any of these people who wrote letters would be interested in joining our committee. Real change happens when we work together. 1 month after the incident, Judge Richard Harrison sat in his chambers, reviewing the changes that had transformed his courthouse. The walls, once decorated with his legal achievements, now featured charts tracking the court's progress in addressing bias. On his desk lay the latest report from the review committee Sarah had helped establish. His assistant knocked on the door. Judge Harrison, the first group is ready for their bias training session. The instructor from the Diversity Institute is waiting in conference room A. The judge stood up, straightening his robes. This wasn't just another mandatory training. It was a program he had personally helped design after weeks of consultation with Sarah and her team of experts. In the hallway, he passed Mrs. Rodriguez, who was updating the new digital notice board. The screen displayed real-time statistics about case outcomes, making the court's decision-making process transparent to the public. It had been Sarah's idea, using technology similar to what her venture capital firm used to track investment patterns. "The numbers are improving, Your Honor," Mrs. Rodriguez said, pointing to the screen. "Fine amounts are becoming more consistent across all demographics, and appeal rates have dropped by 30%. Judge Harrison nodded, remembering how he had initially resisted this level of transparency. Now he saw its value. "Any feedback from the morning session?" "Yes, actually. A young woman mentioned how different her experience was compared to last year. She said she felt heard for the first time in a courtroom." As he entered the conference room, Judge Harrison saw 20 other judges from various districts, all there for the training. Some had traveled from different states after hearing about Boston's new approach to judicial reform. "Before we begin," he addressed his colleagues, "I want to share something personal." The room fell quiet. "A month ago, I thought I was a fair judge. It took someone brave enough to stand up to me to show how wrong I was." He clicked through his presentation slides, showing the data Sarah's team had collected. "These numbers tell a story we can't ignore. But today, we're not here to feel guilty. We're here to learn how to do better." His phone buzzed, a message from Sarah. The governor had just approved funding to expand their reform program statewide. More importantly, 3 other states were requesting their training materials. During the lunch break, Judge Harrison walked to the courthouse lobby where a new help desk had been installed. Staffed by volunteer law students and retired attorneys, it provided free legal guidance to anyone who needed it. The idea had come from one of the letters Sarah had received. "Judge Harrison," a voice called out. He turned to see Officer Peterson, the same officer from Sarah's traffic stop, walking toward him. "I just finished the new patrol sensitivity training. Never realized how many assumptions we make on the job." The judge nodded understanding. "We all have blind spots, officer. The important thing is what we do once we recognize them." Back in his chambers, he found an invitation on his desk. Sarah's venture capital firm was hosting a technology conference, and they wanted him to speak about using data analytics to identify and address bias in the legal system. His clerk appeared with the afternoon's case files. "Different from a month ago, isn't it?" she said, noting his changed approach to reviewing cases. "You actually smile now when you're working." "Because now I'm doing the job the way it should be done," he replied, carefully reading each file. Equal justice isn't just a phrase on the wall anymore. Later that afternoon, as he prepared for another training session, Judge Harrison received an email from a colleague in California. They had implemented similar reforms and were seeing positive results. Attached was a photo of their courthouse's new transparency dashboard, modeled after Boston's system. Looking out his window at the busy street below, Judge Harrison thought about how one traffic citation had sparked such significant change. He remembered his own arrogance that day, how quickly he had judged Sarah based on his preconceptions. "Your 2 o'clock appointment is here," his assistant announced. "It's a group of law students interested in joining the court monitoring program." Judge Harrison smiled, gathering his materials. The young faces he was about to meet represented the future of the justice system, a future that, thanks to one remarkable woman's approach to injustice, looked brighter than ever. 6 months after the traffic court incident, Sarah Chen Williams stood at the podium in the grand ballroom of the Boston Convention Center. The room was packed with judges, lawyers, and court administrators from across the country, all gathered for the National Conference on Judicial Reform. "When I walked into that courtroom 6 months ago," Sarah began, her voice carrying through the silent room, "I was just another person fighting an unfair traffic ticket. Today, I stand before you as a partner in change." In the front row, Judge Harrison sat next to his colleagues from other states. He looked different now, more humble, more approachable. The arrogant judge from 6 months ago had been transformed by his experience. "The success we've seen in Boston isn't just about numbers," Sarah continued, clicking to her next slide. "Though the numbers are impressive. Bias complaints down 70%. Fine disparities nearly eliminated. Appeal rates cut in half." Marcus and Jessica, sitting nearby, nodded proudly. Their venture capital firm had provided the technology and expertise to make these changes possible, proving that business skills could help solve social problems. "But the real story isn't in the statistics," Sarah said, putting down her notes. "It's in the stories I hear every day. The young black doctor who now feels confident walking into traffic court. The Hispanic business owner who was treated with respect during her hearing. The Asian student who didn't have to prove his intelligence to be believed." Mrs. Rodriguez, who had flown in specially for the conference, wiped away a tear. She had witnessed the transformation of her courthouse firsthand, seeing how small changes in attitude led to big changes in justice. "This journey taught me something important," Sarah continued. "Real change doesn't come from pointing fingers or seeking revenge. It comes from working together to build better systems." She clicked to a new slide showing the mobile app they had developed. "Starting next month, this application will be available to courts nationwide. It tracks decision patterns, flags potential bias, and provides real-time feedback to judges and court staff." Judge Harrison stood up to join Sarah at the podium. Together, they had been invited to demonstrate how their unlikely partnership had created a model for reform. 6 months ago, Judge Harrison admitted to the audience, "I was part of the problem. Ms. Chen Williams showed me a better way, not through anger or shame, but through wisdom and collaboration." Sarah smiled, remembering their first meeting after the incident. And Judge Harrison proved that when people are willing to acknowledge their mistakes and work for change, amazing things can happen. The audience applauded as Sarah showed the final results of their 6-month pilot program. 20 courts had adopted their reforms, with another 50 scheduled to begin soon. The governor had made their bias training mandatory for all state judges, and 3 other states were following suit. "But our work isn't finished," Sarah said, turning serious. "This is just the beginning. We need every person in this room to commit to making change in their own courthouses." Officer Peterson, who had become an enthusiastic supporter of police reform, stood up from his seat. "The new training programs have changed how we handle traffic stops," he reported. "We're seeing better community relations and fewer complaints." As Sarah concluded her speech, she noticed a group of law students in the back of the room, eagerly taking notes. They represented the future she and Judge Harrison were working to create, a future where justice truly was blind. 6 months ago, I was angry about a traffic ticket," Sarah said in closing. "Today, I'm thankful for it, because sometimes the worst moments in our lives can lead to the best changes, if we're brave enough to seize the opportunity." The standing ovation lasted for several minutes. As Sarah gathered her materials, she saw messages from her venture capital team about new investments waiting for her attention. But somehow, this work, creating change in the justice system, felt like her most important investment yet. Judge Harrison approached her with tears in his eyes. "Thank you," he said simply, "for showing me what justice really means." Sarah shook his hand firmly. "Thank you for proving that it's never too late to change," she replied. "Now, let's get back to work. We still have a lot of courthouses to transform."